Hi, my name is Judy Shintani from Foothill College, and today we're going to be talking about Leonardo da Vinci. He was born on April 15th in 1492 and died on May 2nd, 1597, at the age of 67 years old. He's known as a scientist and an artist. Many people still think that he's the most fascinating artist and scientist that has ever lived.
Born in 1452, Leonardo da Vinci is most famous as a painter, but he was also a scientist, mathematician, engineer, inventor, sculptor, architect, botanist, musician, and writer. He is one of the most famous artists in history, and some people think he is one of the most talented people ever to have lived. Leonardo was born in Vinci, a small town in Italy. That is where he got his name. Da Vinci means of Vinci, so he was known as Leonardo from Vinci because he did not have a last name. Leonardo started painting while he was a child, and when he was 14, he was sent to the city of Florence and apprenticed to an artist named Verrocchio. In the workshop, Verrocchio and his apprentices would often work on pieces together. That is why Leonardo only painted part of the earliest paintings we have of his. By the time he was 20, Leonardo da Vinci was good enough that his father set him up in his own workshop, and that is when he began creating artwork of his own. Despite training as an artist, it seems that Leonardo did not think of himself as a painter. When he moved to Milan at the age of 30, he wrote a letter to the Duke there, talking about the wonderful and different things he could do in engineering, and he said he could also paint. During the Renaissance, when Da Vinci lived, art and science were not seen as separate studies, but more like two sides of the same coin. It's true that Leonardo spent a great deal of time in a close and careful study of the world around him, and he was full of ideas for inventions that would not be used for hundreds of years. He spent a long time studying the human body. He imagined ways that people could walk on water and designed armored tanks. He invented an early parachute and a version of the helicopter, a self-propelled cart, and scuba diving gear. Some of his inventions were put to use, some were forgotten, and others never really worked. One thing Leonardo wanted all his life was to find a way for a person to fly. "You may see that the beating of its wings against the air supports a heavy eagle," he said. "Again you may see the air in motion over the sea, fill the swelling sails and drive heavily laden ships." From these instances and the reasons given, a man with wings large enough and duly connected might learn to overcome the resistance of the air and, by conquering it, succeed in subjugating it and rising above it. He studied birds and tried countless ways, but as far as we know, Leonardo da Vinci never achieved flight. While his contributions to science for the most part went unrecognized for many years, Leonardo's genius for painting was obvious to everyone who saw it. Two of his paintings, The Last Supper and the Mona Lisa, are considered the most famous paintings in the world. Unlike many other artists, Leonardo da Vinci was incredibly famous and successful during his lifetime. After he died, people were still interested in him and his art. For more than 500 years, people have studied and enjoyed his work. In 1568, Giorgio Vasari wrote this about Da Vinci. "In the normal course of events, many men and women are born with remarkable talents, but occasionally, in a way that transcends nature, a single person is marvelously endowed by heaven with beauty, grace, and talent in such abundance that he leaves other men far behind. All his actions seem inspired, and indeed everything he does clearly comes from God rather than from human skill. Everyone acknowledged that this was true of Leonardo da Vinci.
Hi, I wanted to show you this next video because it's a mystery about a painting that was supposedly done by Da Vinci and all its trials and tribulations till it came to the attention of the public recently. And there's some interesting discussion by a woman who did some restoration on it. So, one moment.
140 minute bid at 140 minutes.
I always thought it would be the most expensive work of art ever sold. It's incredible and unbelievably rare. Nothing conjures with the name of Leonardo. We had tens of thousands of people on 3 continents line up for hours in some cases, and people were tremendously excited to see it.
I had a relationship with the Salvatore Mundi, and he had one with me. This was an incredibly powerful image, and it was like nothing that I've ever worked on, and I believe like nothing that's ever been painted. I've known Robert Simon for a very long time, and Robert had purchased the painting sometime, I think it was in April of 2005. He called and asked if he could bring a picture over that he had just purchased. And I asked Bob if he wanted me to go ahead and clean it. It had very recent kind of sticky varnish on it and some sloppy retouching that also looked quite recent.
It was heavily overpainted, and it was thought to be a copy, and it was sold for a couple $1,000s at an estate sale in Louisiana. It was found by a man named Alex Parrish, who then sold a share of it to Robert Simon, who is a very distinguished authority on Italian Renaissance paintings. He thought he must be crazy when he said he thought he might offend Leonardo da Vinci. And they started having it cleaned, and at that point, the quality of it really began to come through, and they got quite excited, and they brought in Diane Mosini, who's a very distinguished restorer in New York.
I was not thinking this is by Leonardo. I was just concentrating on what had to be done to make the picture legible, not to lose any of the original. It just didn't enter my mind. It probably would have interfered with my ability and my freedom to work on it and to develop kind of a working relationship with it. We noticed that the panel itself had a very large crack that ran the whole length of the panel from top to bottom. It was a curve that went right around the side of the Salvatore Mundi's head, and that was kind of horrifying thing to discover. Other parts of the painting were preserved perfectly.
I'd already been hearing rumors from Leonardo scholars who had seen it, who were sort of hinting that they had seen this kind of amazing thing. A consensus developed over time that this really was this lost original that had thought had disappeared for centuries. By the time he paints at around 1500, Leonardo is almost 50. He's the most famous artist in the world. There is an assumption that it must have been for a very important patron. He used very, very precious materials, and he finishes it, which he doesn't do that often. He starts a lot and abandons it along the way, but he finishes this. First absolutely known history of it is about 100 years later, when it's in the collection of Charles I of England. He dies hugely in debt, and the crown decides to give away much of his art collection in repayment of his debts. It's given to Mason, who would be the equivalent of an architect or a builder named John Stone, in repayment for this debt. And 9 years later, when the monarchy is restored and Charles II becomes king, Parliament passes an act that says basically, all you people who had debts from the king and got stuff from us, give it back. And so it enters the collection of Charles II. It then descends to his younger brother and successor, James II. His mistress is a woman named Catherine Sedley, and they have a child together, and she inherits it from him. And then she marries the first Duke of Buckingham, who builds Buckingham House, which eventually, by their heirs, is sold and is now Buckingham Palace. And when the house is sold to the crown, the contents of it are sold off at an auction in 1763. And at that point, it just completely disappears. We have no idea what happened. It's sold as by Leonardo, but for a very small amount of money. And so it's probable that even by that point, the painting had been quite heavily overpainted.
I worked on it off and on for 5 years. The cleaning was really not particularly revelatory because the head had been completely repainted. It was was a beard. It looks quite grotesque. Wherever there were damages, they just made this kind of red beard. But all of that was done in the not so distant past, and it came off very easily.
Maybe 290. I thought so. 300 million.
From 1763, we have no idea from that point on what happens to it. Until the end of the 19th century, when it reappears and it's sold to a very eminent British collector, Francis Cook. But it's sold as a copy or a follower of Leonardo. And you can see it's heavily overpainted. It was sort of just made to look more masculine. I think it was probably seen as more fitting by the 19th century. And it remains in the collection where nobody pays much attention to it until 1958, when it's sold at Sotheby's in London for £45. It's bought by an American, we think. And it ends up in collections in America until 2005, when it's sold for, again, a very, very small amount of money as a copy in Louisiana.
It wasn't until I was at the very, very end of the restoration, and there was one retouch around the mouth, which was extremely difficult. I had a book about technical investigations of the Mona Lisa, detailed reproductions, and one was just of Mona Lisa's mouth. So I actually cut the page out of the book and tacked it to my easel. That was the moment when I had to say to myself, of course it's by Leonardo, because nobody else paints this way. This picture is a paradigm of everything that he knew technically about painting, and much of what he thought about time, eternity, and cosmos. It wasn't just a portrait of Jesus Christ painted for the king. This was something that became very important to him.
Those of you following online, you may not have heard it. The figure 350 was called on the telephone at 350 million for Leonardo's South Normandy.
The fact that it went for so much money will protect it.
$370 million. 400 million.
I only care about it being protected and it being one of the most important expressions in paint that Leonardo left us about his thinking. So the price doesn't matter.
In my dreams, it's sort of almost exactly what I thought it would sell for. I always thought it would make the biggest price ever. So it was a trophy of the greatest rarity.
Leonardo Salvatore Mundi selling here at Christie's, $400 million is the bid, and the piece is sold.
Hi, it's Judy Shintani from Foothill Back, and I hope you enjoyed seeing the video on Leonardo da Vinci and enjoyed learning about him as much as I did. He's quite an amazing artist, and I look forward to talking to you again soon. Bye.